Hi, my name is Alex from APC Dynamics, and in this video, I will talk about how to receive containers containing the items that you buy from your vendors using the Freight Container Receiving Management tool. I will go through an example on how to process containers if you assume the ownership of the goods when it's on the water. I will go through an example of receiving a container if you assume the ownership of the goods when it lands to your location. And lastly, we'll talk about how to easily allocate any kind of landed cost that's going to be billed to you per container that you're receiving. Let's get started. So you place the couple of purchase orders to your overseas vendors, and your overseas vendor tells you that they're ready to ship these products to you on a container. Now typically when the overseas vendors ship items to you, they're going to consolidate a bunch of purchase orders and ship the same items to you. In addition, they're going to send you a bill lading or pro forma invoice for the goods that they're going to be loading onto the container. Once you have that document, you would go to the containers and create a new container based on the information on the bill lading. So I'm going to click on new, enter the container number, enter the bill lading. Now there are a couple other fields for your information. I could click on show more. There are a lot of other informations that are related to the container. For the purpose of this demo, I am going to skip them and I will focus on the important fields that's required. If you assume the ownership of the inventory on the container, you will need to define this OTW location. This tells the system that as soon as the vendor ships the product and the item hits the water, you will assume ownership of the goods. Next, I need to define the final destination location where it's going to be shipped to ultimately. I'm going to receive everything to the blue location. Next, I'm going to click on Get Container Lines and Get Purchase Lines. On this list, you will see all of the items that are on the blue location, which is a final destination, or the on the water location. Now typically, since you're buying from overseas vendor, you're going to want to sort this by item number. As I mentioned before, manufacturers, when they ship you a container of goods, they're going to try to ship the same items because it's easier to pack, and because on the production line they typically want to manufacture a lot of the same items. So you just go through and select the items that you want to receive. So I must select a couple of different items for this container and I'm going to click OK. After the lines are inserted, you could change the quantity based on what's defined on the bill lading. So for example, if the vendor is sending only 2,000 of the 3,000, you're going to click on purchase, change quantity to receive, and set the new quantity to receive. You could also over receive. When you over receive, it'll create an additional line for the net difference. If you know the tariff number and the HTS code for this item, you could define it. You can also define the country of origin to which the tariff or the duty is going to be calculated from. This will come into play when we want to allocate our landed cost for our inventory. Now that we've configured the container lines to what the vendor bill lading is, we're going to process the departure. Make sure you update the posting date to the departure and click on process departure, push yes. Alright, after I process the departure, the system will post the receipt into the on the water location. You now assume ownership of the inventory that's going to be in the on the water location. This means that when you print your inventory valuation reports, it's going to include the inventory that's going to be on the water. So a couple weeks goes by and you're notified that your container has arrived at the port. When it arrives at the port, you just need to bring up the container and click on process arrival. This will move the inventory. This will post the inventory that's on the water and move it into the in-transit location to the blue warehouse, which is your final location. At this point, I want to mention that at any given point in the container receiving process, you can generate and pay off the pro forma invoice, or if you know the landed cost you could enter into this landed cost allocation to keep track of the freight costs, broker fees, any tariff and duties. For the purpose of the demo, I'm going to save that part for last, but if you know the details of those invoices, you could enter those and process them right away. So the last step of the container receiving process is after the container gets received into your final destination, you click on process final location to confirm the receipt from the goods into your inventory. If you have warehouse management enabled, it will automatically create the warehouse receipt and create the putaways depending on how you set up your directed pick and put away location. So I might go ahead and click on process final location, push yes, and that completes the process. This next process, I'm going to show you how to process a container if you do not use the on the water location. So for example, if your Incoterm is taking ownership when you receive the goods, you will not need the on the water location. So same thing, you will enter the container number and enter the bill of lading. Again, update the posting date, blank out the on the water location code and type in the final location, final destination location. From here, same thing, we use the get container lines, and you'll notice that it will only list out the items that are marked to be received in the blue location. So I'm going to highlight the items that I'm going to receive, click OK. If I need to update the quantities, I can change the quantity to receive. In this case, I'm just going to receive in full. Click on process departure. When it arrives at the dock, process arrival. And when you are receiving the container and assuming ownership, you would click on process final location. And that completes the process. Alright, so I talked about processing a container if you use it on the water location, and I've also gone through the process if you're not using the on the water location. Last, I'll talk about how to allocate the landed cost per container and also how to invoice the containers that you received. I just want to highlight the fact that at any given point in the container receiving process, you can generate the purchase invoice. You don't have to wait for it to get to the final destination, because if you assume the goods when it hits the water, you will need to pay the pro forma invoice that your vendor sent you. So let's go ahead and do that. To invoice the container, click on purchasing and purchase invoices. I'm going to generate a new purchase invoice. Define the vendor name that you bought the products from. So the vendor is going to be Coolwood Technologies, and put in the vendor invoice. From here, click on line, function, and get receipt lines. It will list out the receipts that you've made with the container document. Just going to highlight these two, click OK. Make sure you have the correct unit cost defined and click on post. And that completes the process. First, we're going to talk about how to allocate your landed costs from your freight forwarder to the containers that you receive. You could do this from the container if you haven't fully received the container yet, or from the posted container when it's fully received. If we're processing from the container page, you could bring up a container. You could allocate using the landed cost allocation page, and it will automatically, the app will know which container you're going to be allocating the landed cost to. For our example, I'm going to go to the posted container page, and I'm going to allocate based on the posted container. I'm going to bring up the posted containers that I was working with, click on the landed cost allocation, and from here you just enter the different fees that your freight forwarder displays on their invoice. So let's say the broker fee is $500, and I'm going to allocate by the dollar value of the items that we're importing. Allocate the freight, and again, you could allocate by the weight, by volume. I'm going to allocate it by amount. And lastly, you want to allocate the tariff, customs, and duties charged by the customs. So enter amounts. Since duty is kind of high, we're going to put 20,000, and I'm going to allocate it by tariff and duty. Once I've defined my different charges, I need to define the vendor. So just make sure I have the vendors that is going to be charging me the freight. If you have different vendors, obviously you would change the vendor number. Click on processing, process all lines, and I'm going to create a new invoice, or you could add it to the existing invoice. In this case, I'm going to create new. It will automatically link the purchase document. So if I click on the purchase document, it will bring me the document and it will automatically create the item charge and link it to the appropriate receipts for the container. So if I click on the broker fee, go to my item charge assignment, you'll see that it will automatically allocate based on the allocation method that I've selected. For the tariff, I want to go to the item charge assignment and I want to make sure my total amount matches what the system calculated. If it isn't, you'll need to raise an issue with your freight forwarder. In this case, I'm just going to update the direct unit cost so it matches the dollar amount. When it's ready to go, type in the vendor invoice number and post. And this will automatically post the landed cost to the container you just received. Going back to the landed cost page, you'll see the posted invoice number that I've generated previously. If I click on this, you'll be able to see the details of this. And that's it. If you run into any issues, please give us a call.